Tomorrow morning, the FCC will make a decision that many believe will determine the future of the internet. The issue they're taking on has come to be known as net neutrality, something that didn't really capture the public's attention until this past June, when comedian John Oliver made it a major issue on his show.
Net neutrality. The only two words that promise more boredom in the English language are featuring Sting. But here's the thing. Net neutrality is actually hugely important. Essentially, it means that all data has to be treated equally, no matter who creates it. It's why the internet is a weirdly level playing field.
After a 10-minute-long explanation of net neutrality, Oliver issued an impassioned call to his viewers.
We need you to get out there and for once in your lives, focus your indiscriminate rage in a useful direction. Seize your moments, my lovely trolls. Turn on caps lock and fly, my pretties.
The result was nearly 4 million comments on the FCC's website and a lengthy public debate. But many people are still a little bit confused as to exactly what's at stake in this ruling. Joining me now to shed some light on that is Dan Primack, senior editor at Fortune magazine. Dan, welcome.
Thanks.
So let's start off with what I think I can call the idiot's guide to net neutrality. Given that some people have a really hard time wrapping their brains around this, what is this debate about?
Net neutrality is ultimately what people think the way people currently think the internet works. In other words, when you go to a website, WGBH.com or CNN.com, that you're able to access any legal website and that you're going to be able to access it at the speed at which your provider is. You might have a very fast connection or slow, but they'll all load the same, or at least they should load the same. The issue with net neutrality, there's been some talk about internet service providers, the Comcast, Verizons of the world, saying in certain cases, we're going to slow down your service if we can't reach an agreement with WGBH or CNN or Netflix, which is a lot of data. And so the idea behind net neutrality is there would be no discrimination against users or against content providers on the web, that the gatekeepers would just be gatekeepers. They wouldn't be folks who are actually throttling service.
So what is the FCC expected to do tomorrow?
The FCC is expected, and they're expected to do this on a 3-2 partisan vote, Democrats controlling it because President Obama is in office. They're expected to pass a rule which is kind of tied to Title II of the FCC Communication Act, which basically is the same thing that oversees utilities like the phone company. And the idea basically is to institute net neutrality and say to internet service providers, and also mobile providers, by the way, this would cover wireless and tablets, and say you cannot, for example, say to Netflix, you have to pay us to get your service to users. There would be no discrimination, essentially.
All right. If they do that, what will the short-term consequences be? Will there be any, pain for consumers? How will companies like Comcast and Verizon respond? And then what might the long-term unanticipated consequences be?
The first part is we don't know exactly because we haven't actually seen the rules. The way the FCC works, unfortunately, is you, and when I say we, the public, even Congress, doesn't actually get to see the rules until it either passes or doesn't. So we've gotten a fact sheet on what should be in there. In the short term, you shouldn't see anything if you're a consumer. Assuming this passes, you shouldn't see anything. The issue with price hikes, a lot of the companies, Verizon, Comcast, have said, look, Title II has rate requirements in there. In other words, the FCC can control phone call rates. Now, Tom Wheeler, who's the FCC chairman, said that's not in here. Assuming it's not, there shouldn't be any change, but that doesn't mean Verizon, Comcast, et cetera, wouldn't raise rates and use this as pretext.
All right. Now, as a customer, as I hear you describe this, I find myself hoping that maybe if the FCC does what it's expected to do, that it could bring some sort of cost regulation when it comes to ISPs. Is that a possibility? Because right now, I mean, if you're getting sort of the full slate from Comcast or Verizon, you're paying so much money. So might there be any kind of consumer relief?
Right now, it does not appear that way. And Wheeler's said there won't be. There's talk about a congressional bill to talk about that. The folks who are against net neutrality, or a lot of the folks, that's their fear. Their fear is even if it's not codified in this rule, that the next FCC, whether it be a Democratic or Republican president, could change that. And by using Title II, it gives the next FCC commissioner a lot of latitude possibly to do that.
Tell me a little more about the arguments that industry is making against this. What are the sort of doomsday scenarios they paint if this happens?
Well, for starters, it's worth noting the only reason this is happening is because there were earlier net neutrality rules under a former FCC commissioner which were much more modest. Verizon sued to stop those in federal court. Verizon won, and thus the FCC is doing this as a way to satisfy the court. So Verizon really kind of made a giant mistake.
Oh, interesting.
They're getting punished for their own win. In general, what the providers are saying is, look, we spend a lot of money investing in infrastructure, in towers and wires and all that stuff. if there are potentially rate requirements on us, if we have to charge less or if we get capped, we're not going to be able to spend the billions on new infrastructure, and thus the speed you have of internet today is the speed you'll have in 10 years, the service you have today. And if you think back 10 years, obviously everything was much slower.
So is that the way that they sort of counter the innovation argument that proponents of net neutrality make? Because I think isn't one of the big arguments for net neutrality that the internet has been this wondrous thing that has allowed, Amazon to come out of nowhere to become this retail behemoth, or other, valuable entities, Netflix, for example.
No.
So is that the way that the ISPs, the internet service providers, come back and say, no, this will be bad for innovation?
That's exactly how they do. They say, we've been able to get it faster. And as you said, for the providers, the real concern, particularly in places like Silicon Valley, and the reason why most folks say in the Valley are generally supporting this, is to say, Twitter's probably a good example, right? A company that came out of nowhere, didn't have any revenue for years, and started generating tons of traffic. In theory, the fear is that a company like Comcast could say to Twitter, 2-year-old Twitter, say, there's so much information coming through your system, we need you to start paying us if you want our users to be able to get it in real time. Twitter, at which point either would have to pay it. If it couldn't pay it, there might not be Twitter.
Well, and then conversely, couldn't the next Twitter be incapable of paying the increased price for the high speeds and then not be able to take off?
That's absolutely the fear, and particularly given if it's something like video.
Is it possible that given the massive amount of data that we all consume over the internet these days, that an equal playing field simply is not tenable anymore in the way that it used to be? I mean, with people binge watching, however many episodes of Orange is the New Black on Netflix on a given night or things like that, because it doesn't work the way today that it worked 20 years ago.
That's true. There's two pieces of this, and there's something called the back end, and this gets really into the weeds. But Netflix, for example, is to a certain extent already paying some of the service providers on the back end. There's questions what's going to be in the ultimate bill. One of the Democratic commissioners wants to address that with an amendment. We'll see if that passes tomorrow. In general, I'd say from my perspective, the way the internet works today, I think it works pretty well. And I think that what net neutrality is supposed to do, and there's potentially unintended consequences, but the way it's supposed to work is basically take the internet that we have today, the service we have today, and codify it and say what you get today is what you're going to get 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
If in fact that is what the FCC does, if they, when the rule actually comes out, it is a codification of the status quo. How durable is that going to be? I mean, could the next FCC, when the partisan balance shifts, could they just go in a different direction? Would the courts overturn this the way they've overturned previous net neutrality rulings? It
is harder to change an existing rule than it is to create a new rule. So it's harder, particularly if everyone thinks it's good. But yeah, it can get changed. In an argument, Mark Cuban, for example, keeps making this argument.
The Dallas Mavericks owner.
Dallas Mavericks owner, internet entrepreneur. He says, well, my real fear here is that, these are all political appointees. So if you do this, then what's the next appointee going to do? Will they put rate hikes? Well, that's possible, but that's always possible. It's entirely possible the next FCC commissioner is going to do something completely different, and the one after that. So it's simply a question of what's best practice for today.
Which then I would think could lead to all sorts of uncertainty that could be bad for the companies that
it could be, but that uncertainty exists. We don't know who the next president is, let alone who they're going to nominate as FCC commissioner. So that uncertainty is always there, politically speaking, with the FCC.
Is the outcome of tomorrow's vote a foregone conclusion, pretty much?
It seems to be, as I said, except for this Democratic commissioner who has kind of thrown a little bit of a monkey wrench in. It appears, I can't imagine they won't work that out before tomorrow, though.
All right, Dan Primack, thanks much.
Thank you.